Nimrod, a figure deeply rooted in the biblical narrative, emerges as a symbol of pride and rebellion. Described as a mighty hunter before the Lord, Nimrod is often remembered for his strength and ambition, but it is his defiance of God's will that makes him a figure of caution. His story, found in Genesis, begins after the Great Flood, a time when humanity was given a fresh start and a divine mandate to spread across the earth and repopulate it. Yet, Nimrod's path diverged sharply from the path set out by God. Instead of humility and obedience, he chose power and control, seeking to establish his own empire, one built not on faithfulness to God, but on human ambition. Nimrod was a descendant of Ham, whose actions had already brought dishonor to the family, as detailed in the curse placed on Ham's son Canaan. Born into this lineage, Nimrod carried the weight of both the divine blessing and the curse of his ancestors. However, unlike his forefathers who were tasked with repopulating the earth, Nimrod had a different vision. His name itself, meaning "we shall rebel," was a precursor to the life he would lead. Rather than spreading out as God had commanded, Nimrod sought to consolidate power, uniting people under his rule. In doing so, he not only disregarded the divine command, but actively opposed it, choosing to build cities and establish kingdoms that would defy God's will. The phrase "a mighty hunter before the Lord" has intrigued scholars for centuries. While it may initially seem to refer to Nimrod's skill in hunting animals, some interpretations suggest that it goes deeper. It could signify his ability to dominate people, using his strength and leadership to impose his will upon them. Others believe it highlights the rebellious nature of his actions, as he positioned himself in opposition to God. Regardless of the exact interpretation, it is clear that Nimrod's reputation for leadership and strength made him a powerful and influential figure in the early days after the flood. Rather than promoting unity among the people in accordance with God's command to fill the earth, Nimrod's ambitions led him to create cities Babel, Erech, Akkad, and Calneh, establishing centers of power and culture. His cities became hubs of trade, governance, and innovation, yet they also symbolized the consolidation of power, contrary to God's command for humanity to spread out. Nimrod's rise to power marked a significant shift in human history, a shift from individual obedience to collective rebellion. His story serves as a stark reminder of the dangers of pursuing greatness without submission to God's will. It warns of the ruin that comes from elevating self above the Creator. After the Great Flood, when humanity was given a fresh start, Nimrod chose to walk a path completely contrary to God's will. Instead of spreading across the earth as commanded, he sought to consolidate power and build a legacy that would defy God's instruction. Rather than fulfilling God's mandate to repopulate the world by scattering, Nimrod took a different route. He decided to establish cities and centralize his rule. His cities, Babel, Erech, Akkad, and Calneh, became the epicenters of human civilization, trade, and governance in the ancient world. These cities were strategically built to serve as hubs of power, and under Nimrod's leadership, they flourished. However, beneath the surface of these impressive achievements lay a spirit of rebellion. Nimrod's actions directly contradicted God's command for humanity to disperse and fill the earth. Instead of unity under God's plan, Nimrod's vision was for unity under his own rule. Nimrod's desire to consolidate power was not just about creating cities for the sake of survival or prosperity. It was about control. He wanted to unite the people under his leadership and bring them together under one banner, not for the glory of God, but for his own. This ambition eventually laid the groundwork for the infamous Tower of Babel. Nimrod's vision for Babel was clear. It was to be a monumental project that would reach the heavens, symbolizing humanity's independence and self-reliance. The tower would be more than just a physical structure. It was a defiant statement against God's authority. The purpose was to make a name for humanity, not for the Creator. This ambition was not just about human achievement, but about rejecting God's original design for humanity to fill the earth and be stewards of creation. As Nimrod's cities grew, so did his influence, and with that influence came an increasing disregard for God's command. The world after the flood was meant to be a time of renewal, a chance for humanity to rebuild and live in obedience to God's covenant. But Nimrod's actions set a different tone. His decision to centralize power in cities rather than spread out created a tension in the world, one that ultimately culminated in the rebellion at Babel. Nimrod's ambition to create a unified kingdom, a kingdom that rejected God's will, would have far-reaching consequences. His cities and the Tower of Babel came to symbolize the pride and self-exaltation of humanity, and they would stand as a monument to the dangers of pursuing greatness apart from God. In the end, Nimrod's pursuit of power and control serves as a powerful reminder of the consequences of rebellion and the ultimate futility of trying to achieve greatness without submission to God's will. The Tower of Babel stands as one of the most significant symbols of human pride and rebellion in the Bible. This monumental project, initiated under Nimrod's leadership, was more than just an ambitious architectural feat. It represented humanity's collective desire to reject God's authority and assert their independence. After the flood, when humanity was given a fresh start with the command to spread across the earth and fill it, the people of Babel chose to defy that command. They decided to remain in one place, build a city, and construct a tower that would reach the heavens. The purpose of this tower was made clear: to make a name for themselves and to prevent being scattered across the earth. This was a direct rejection of God's original design for humanity. The ambition behind the construction of the Tower of Babel was rooted in the desire for self-glorification and independence from God. The people wanted to create a legacy, not to honor the Creator, but to exalt themselves. They believed that through their collective effort, they could achieve greatness and security without God's guidance. The tower was to be a physical manifestation of their unity and strength, a symbol of their ability to reach the heavens and assert their dominance. In doing so, they sought to establish their own identity apart from God's will, choosing to rely on human effort rather than divine provision. Nimrod, as the leader behind this rebellion, embodied the spirit of defiance that marked the project. His desire to create a centralized kingdom and a lasting legacy of power was evident in the construction of Babel. He was a unifying force, rallying people to his cause and bringing them together under his rule. But his ambition went beyond the creation of cities. It was about building a system that would glorify human achievement rather than God's sovereignty. The Tower of Babel was to be the crowning achievement of Nimrod's empire, a towering symbol of human ingenuity and pride. The building of the tower, however, had profound theological implications. It represented humanity's refusal to submit to God's plan for them. The people of Babel sought to find their security and significance in their own efforts, rather than in obedience to God's will. This is where their ambition went wrong. By trying to build a tower that reached the heavens, they were attempting to elevate themselves to a status they were never meant to have, equal to or even above God. Their pursuit was not about fulfilling a divine purpose, but about establishing their own power and glory. The tower was not just an architectural marvel. It was a declaration of rebellion, an attempt to create a world where humanity stood at the center, apart from God's authority. In the end, the Tower of Babel serves as a cautionary tale about the dangers of human pride and self-reliance. It highlights the destructive power of ambition when it is rooted in defiance against God's will, reminding us that true greatness comes not from building monuments to ourselves, but from living in humility and obedience to the Creator. God's intervention at the Tower of Babel was swift and decisive, serving as a powerful reminder of His authority over all creation. As humanity gathered together in defiance of God's command to spread across the earth, their unified effort to build the tower became a direct challenge to His sovereignty. The people of Babel sought to make a name for themselves, constructing a tower that would reach the heavens. However, their ambitious plan was about to be disrupted by the Creator himself. In Genesis 11:5, the Bible states, "But the Lord came down to see the city and the tower the people were building." This statement is filled with irony. The people believed their tower would reach the heavens, yet in the eyes of God, it was so insignificant that he had to come down to witness their efforts. God's response to their rebellion was to confuse their language. This divine act shattered the unity that had fueled the people's project, making it impossible for them to communicate with one another. In an instant, the cooperative effort that had brought them together was undone. The people who had been working in unison now found themselves unable to understand each other's speech. They could no longer continue the construction of the tower, and as a result, the project came to a halt. God's decision to confuse their language was not just a judgment on their pride, but also an act of mercy. If left unchecked, the people's rebellion could have spiraled further, leading to even greater defiance of God's will. By scattering them, God ensured that his original command for humanity to fill the earth would be fulfilled even in the face of human resistance. The scattering of the people of Babel marked a turning point in human history. The unity that had been central to Nimrod's vision of power and control was broken, and the people were forced to disperse across the earth, forming distinct nations and cultures. This moment not only fulfilled God's command, but also prevented humanity from consolidating their rebellion. It was a clear demonstration of God's authority, showing that no human ambition, no matter how grand, could succeed if it stood in opposition to his will. The consequences for Nimrod were profound. As the leader of Babel and the architect of its grand vision, he saw his empire unravel in the wake of God's intervention. His ambition to unite humanity under his rule was shattered, and the cities he had built began to drift apart. The Tower of Babel, once a symbol of human strength and unity, stood unfinished, a testament to the futility of human pride and rebellion against God. God's intervention at Babel serves as a reminder that his plans will always prevail, and no matter how ambitious our efforts may be, they will ultimately fail if they are not aligned with his purposes. The consequences of the rebellion at the Tower of Babel were far-reaching, and for Nimrod, they marked the beginning of the end of his influence. Nimrod, who had once been a powerful and respected leader, now faced the undeniable reality that his efforts to establish a unified kingdom had failed. The centralization of power, which he had worked so hard to achieve, was dismantled in an instant by God's intervention. The people who had once followed Nimrod's vision for a single unified empire were suddenly scattered across the earth, divided by different languages and cultures. The once cohesive and thriving population was now fragmented, with each group speaking a different language, unable to understand one another. This division rendered Nimrod's plans for unity and control utterly futile. As the leader of Babel, Nimrod's authority had been built on the strength of a unified people. His ability to rally them under one banner had allowed him to consolidate power and establish cities that symbolized his ambition and dominance. However, God's intervention shattered that unity and forced Nimrod to relinquish the control he had so carefully cultivated. The people were no longer able to work together toward a common goal, and the cities he had built began to drift apart. The once unified empire now existed in fragments, each group isolated by language and geography, no longer under Nimrod's influence. His kingdom, once a symbol of power and strength, had fallen apart. This scattering of people also had a broader impact on the course of human history. While it represented the failure of Nimrod's centralized vision, it also fulfilled God's original command for humanity to spread across the earth. The dispersion of people led to the formation of distinct nations, each with its own language, culture, and identity. Although this division was a direct consequence of human rebellion, it was also part of God's greater plan for creation. The world became a place of diversity, with unique cultures and peoples contributing to the richness of human history. For Nimrod, the scattering was a humbling experience. His ambition to build a lasting legacy of unity and power had been shattered. His influence waned as the people he once led scattered and developed their own identities. The story of Nimrod's fall serves as a stark reminder of the fragility of human ambition when it is rooted in pride and defiance of God's will. Despite his great achievements as a leader and builder, Nimrod's legacy was marred by his rebellion, leaving behind a fractured kingdom and a reminder of the dangers of self-exaltation. His story warns us that no matter how grand our ambitions may seem, they will ultimately crumble if they are not aligned with God's purposes. Nimrod's story offers a powerful lesson about the dangers of pride and unchecked ambition. His life serves as a cautionary tale of what can happen when human greatness is sought apart from God's will. Throughout his rise to power, Nimrod demonstrated remarkable leadership and vision. He built cities, consolidated power, and united people under his rule, all of which made him a formidable figure in the ancient world. However, beneath his accomplishments lay a foundation of pride, rebellion, and self-exaltation. His desire to create a legacy of power and control overshadowed his obedience to God. Instead of following God's command to spread across the earth and fill it, he sought to consolidate people in one place and establish a centralized kingdom that defied the divine order. This ambition ultimately led him to pursue the construction of the Tower of Babel, a monumental project intended to reach the heavens and secure humanity's independence from God. Nimrod's life teaches us that while ambition and leadership are not inherently wrong, they become destructive when driven by self-interest and a desire for recognition. His rise to power was rooted in the pursuit of personal glory rather than in the service of God's purpose for humanity. This is where his ambitions went astray. He sought to build a name for himself, to create a legacy that would last, and to exert control over the world. In doing so, he placed his desires above God's will, believing that his strength, wisdom, and leadership could shape the world according to his vision, independent of divine guidance. The construction of the Tower of Babel, the pinnacle of his ambition, became a symbol of humanity's defiance, as the people worked together to create a monument that honored their own achievements, rather than God's authority. The downfall of Nimrod and the scattering of the people at Babel were clear consequences of this misplaced ambition. By choosing to pursue greatness apart from God, Nimrod's plans were ultimately undone. The tower, a physical manifestation of human pride, was left unfinished, and the people were scattered across the earth, divided by language and culture. God's intervention at Babel was a judgment on the pride and rebellion that had fueled the project, but it also served as an act of mercy, preventing humanity from descending further into self-reliance and separation from God. The division of languages and peoples fulfilled God's original command for humanity to fill the earth, ensuring that His will would prevail. Ultimately, Nimrod's story warns us that true greatness is not found in the pursuit of personal ambition or the desire to make a name for ourselves. Instead, it is found in humility and submission to God's will. His life shows us that when our ambitions are rooted in pride and a rejection of God's authority, they will inevitably fail. To build a lasting legacy, we must seek to honor God, align our ambitions with His purposes, and trust that true greatness comes from living in obedience to His plan. The story of Nimrod and the Tower of Babel provides us with a profound lesson on the importance of humility, obedience, and the dangers of unchecked ambition. At the heart of Nimrod's rise to power was his desire to build something that would stand the test of time, to make a name for himself that would echo through generations. His ambition was rooted in self-reliance and pride, and he sought to achieve greatness apart from God's will. This pursuit ultimately led to his downfall, as the very empire he built crumbled, and the grand tower he envisioned was left unfinished. The people of Babel, too, were scattered, their unity shattered by a divine intervention that showed them the futility of their rebellion against God. Nimrod's story is not just an ancient biblical account, but a timeless reflection of the struggles we all face today. In the modern world, we are constantly told to strive for greatness, to build our legacies, and to carve out our names in the world. From CEOs building global empires to individuals chasing fame and success, the temptation to make a name for ourselves often overrides the call for humility and submission to a higher purpose. Like Nimrod, many people today seek to create something enduring, whether it's a career, a reputation, or a personal achievement. However, just as with Nimrod, the danger arises when we begin to prioritize our desires above God's will, seeking to build our own towers of pride. The modern towers we build may not be physical structures, but they take many forms: wealth, status, personal success, or the desire to control our surroundings. These pursuits, while not inherently wrong, become problematic when they shift our focus away from God's plans for our lives. Just as Nimrod's ambition was a rejection of God's command to fill the earth, today's ambition can often lead to an unhealthy self-centeredness that forgets our dependence on God. When we pursue greatness without humility, it can create division, pride, and ultimately emptiness. This story serves as a stark reminder that true greatness is found not in our ability to build or control, but in our ability to submit to God's will and align our ambitions with His purpose. Like the people of Babel, we may find ourselves scattered and confused when we pursue our goals apart from God's guidance. On the other hand, when we humbly surrender our plans and desires to God, He can guide us to a greater and more fulfilling purpose, one that honors Him and brings lasting impact. In our own lives, let us reflect on our motivations. Are we building towers to exalt ourselves, or are we submitting our ambitions to God's plan? The story of Nimrod and the Tower of Babel invites us to evaluate whether we are truly living in alignment with God's will. The legacy we leave behind will not be measured by our own achievements, but by how we lived in obedience to God, trusting that true greatness comes from Him alone. Let this story remind us that when we seek God's glory over our own, we build a foundation that will stand the test of time.